to Good Game, the show for gamers by gamers. I'm Hex.
And I'm Barjo. Hex, what a pleasurable excursion it was last week out to the arcades. Did you have a good time?
Oh, I had a great time caressing the old cabinets, punching those buttons.
Dispensing the hand sanitizer. Yeah. It's good to be back in the comfy reviewing chairs for this week, and let's never go outside again.
Well, agreed. Tonight, we see what happens when you combine the motion control tech of the Kinect with the epic grandeur of Star Wars.
Take your time and remember your training.
We've also been playing in the betas for 2 upcoming MMOs, Terra Online and the WoW expansion Mists of Pandaria.
Plus, Goose will be taken to the skies with a flight combat of birds of steel, and we'll stay up in the wild blue yonder with another gratis gaming.
But first, can you guess what this game is for this week?
All right, kid, we're in pretty bad shape. I read 2, no, wait, make it 3 TIE fighters. They're firing!
News time, Hex.
Good game.
2 weeks ago, the computer and games industry lost one of its pioneers, Jack Tramiel, who died at the age of 83. Tramiel founded the Commodore business in the 1950s, which was originally a typewriter and calculator manufacturer. It was in the 80s that they would move into computing with the VIC-20 and Commodore 64 home computers. Tramiel would later go on to buy Atari's home computer and console divisions, overseeing the launches of the Atari ST, Lynx and Jaguar. He is survived by his wife and 3 sons. Epic Games has confirmed the cancellation of its Kinect-only title, Gears of War Exile. The game was still officially unannounced, but was said to be an on-rails shooter utilising locations from previous Gears of War games. Epic honcho Cliffy B has refrained from offering any more details other than the game's cancellation.
I guess we're all stranded now.
Electronic Arts claims to have been subjected to thousands of anti-gay complaints directed at the board of directors and creative heads as a result of their games Dragon Age, Mass Effect and Star Wars The Old Republic containing the option for same-sex relationships between in-game characters.
I figured you'd be more interested in a shower.
EA has branded the hate mail as political harassment and have been publicly supported by celebrities Stephen Fry and Charlie Brooker, who have both used Twitter to praise EA's equal rights stance.
Good game.
It's not often that we do a preview here at Good Game, but there are some fun MMO betas floating about at the moment. And so this week I thought I'd jump on the beta for Mists of Pandaria. I must admit, it was like coming home again, seeing that login screen, hearing the login sound even, but then I didn't expect this. Pandemonium!
That's a lot of pandas.
Yes, so many pandas. So many, in fact, that I couldn't click the first quest giver. Eventually, I managed to work my way up to the front and get a hold of him, but even then, the next link in that chain, this happened again. I couldn't even command click the respawning item here, so I just gave up.
Well, at least it shows the strength of that WoW engine, though, being able to load all those characters at once.
Yeah, and you know, questing was out of the question, so I did go for a bit of a wander in the zone. But these betas do allow you to create a level 85 character, so I made a level 85 monk and made a statue and did a giant long kick, but you know, without that progressive learning of how to use all the abilities, yeah, it didn't go too well. So not the most comprehensive beta review, I'm afraid, but I was blown away about how they have changed the talent trees. You know, that's an institution in WoW to have points and be able to pick and choose what you want, but now it's all about just abilities. Pick your abilities based on your level and then go.
It's a little bit more like Guild Wars 2 then.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting because it will allow for more variation, especially in PvP. You won't be able to predict what someone is going to do, but I guess it remains to be seen. It's a bit nerve-wracking though. It's a big change. After I put my panda away, I jumped into the beta for Terra Online.
There it is.
This is an MMO you can play completely with a controller if you choose to, and that kind of works, if a little slower when you're navigating the menus. You have to line up your reticule on everything you attack, and that takes quite a while to get used to. This game does have some wacky races, which I love, so I made a fierce Easter-inspired bunny mage. I love the animal races, and they look so funny the way they waddle along, and all the animations of these characters is just beautiful. In fact, I think this is the most beautiful MMO I've ever played, and it didn't skip a beat frame rate wise, and I think that's because it's already been out for a year in Korea.
Yeah, I don't know that much about Korean MMOs, but they seem to have a really strong artistic style to them, and some real thought gone into world construction.
Yeah, and this is no exception, although I didn't really connect with the inhabitants of this world. Right off the bat, I was fighting these rock guys again and again, and it already felt grindy, so that's not a good sign. But I'm optimistic because I love that positional combat, and there are some interesting ideas with the PvP which we couldn't test out, but you can declare yourself an outlaw, and that means anybody who's above your level can attack you and you can fight them back, of course. And also there's guild versus guild PvP, which is especially exciting.
Well, I'd imagine that solves some of the PvP ganking issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just sick of these MMOs wussing out with PvP servers. So, you know, I want to do some trolling, and sadly I think that's the way that MMOs are going. Terra highly sexualizes its female characters, and some of the male ones too, for that matter. There's lots of skimpy clothes and no underpants. How is this supposed to offer protection in combat?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't play this beta myself, but I sat down to study some of this footage, and you know, what I saw was a lot of giant exposed boobs and skimpy outfits and kind of weird, unnecessary gyrating those lobby screens. I mean, that's not a warrior's dance, that's like a stripper dance. I like playing characters that are sexy, but when the armor is just like butt floss, I just think it's stupid.
One thing that took us both back was the childlike race called Ilin. This race is meant to be innocent and pixie-like, and at one with the Earth, but I feel like some of that sexualization of those other races and characters has carried over into this one.
Yeah, I mean, we're not experts on Korean animation, and maybe this is meant to just be perceived as innocent and cute, but from what I saw of these characters, not just in the way they dress, but in the way some of the classes move, it gives the impression of a highly sexualized, childlike, girl-only race. It just, the way some of them were bending over and little sort of skimpy outfits, it just felt really inappropriate to me.
I agree completely, and apparently this is the censored version of these outfits too, according to some websites. So I think we'll have to wait till the release before we can make a final judgment on that.
So, Badger, if you had to recommend one of these over the other, which one would you choose?
Probably Guild Wars 2.
That's not an option.
You know, Guild Wars 2 at least is trying something very different all around, whereas I feel like WoW is just more of the same, even with the changes, and Terra just already feels repetitive. So we've done the WoW thing, we've killed 5 of that and 10 of that so many times, I think we're all getting a bit sick of it.
Yeah, and I guess even when it's got all that great, you know, glorious story in there, like in Star Wars The Old Republic, it's still just the same old thing with a fresh coat of paint.
Yawn.
Tell you what though, a part of me wants to get lost in an online persistent world again and have it take up that much of my life.
Oh, but it's so all-consuming though, you wouldn't have time for other games.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe one day you can clone yourself.
Good game.
Hey Goose, what you doing, Goosey Goose?
Oh, I was just gonna...
Anyway, we've got a game for you to review.
No, I know you guys are doing Flight, and I'm not gonna do any more Flight games.
No, Goose, we're reviewing Flight. We got you this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but no more Flight game, because we all know I'm not gonna do it's a Flight game.
You'll be needing these.
Thank you. So it's goggles on, chocks away, throttle up, and tally-ho, as I gear up for some good old-fashioned flyboy tomfoolery. I have no idea what any of that means.
There they are. Lieutenant, attack the one to the right.
The majority of Birds of Steel chooses to focus heavily on the conflict that took place over the Pacific, as you take part in historic encounters like the massive Battle of Midway, the fight for Wake Island, and of course the infamous Pearl Harbor attack. There's a relatively short campaign that allows you to fly for both sides, and each of these contains a handful of historically accurate missions. These range from aerial dogfights through to some search and destroy missions that mostly include dive bombing and torpedoing enemy targets.
What's that? Fire on deck? Looks like it.
Unfortunately, a lot of these missions involve some really long and tedious flights between checkpoints, and these tend to happen at the start and end of most of the missions. If you're stuck flying for 2 minutes in a straight line, it's really going to kill the buzz you just got from that last dogfight. However, what makes these missions so interesting is the rich and detailed history behind them. Particularly because they're bookended by some of the best historic footage I've ever seen in a video game. Plus, they're all narrated exquisitely by the one and only Stephen Fry.
However, the attack was not nearly as devastating as it could have been. The Japanese failed to damage their main target, the American aircraft carriers.
Once you're finished with the campaign, you can select from a large number of scenarios, and this is where I spent the majority of the game. Without some of the historical limitations, these missions are all about putting you right in the middle of the action. For instance, one of them has you strafing fire on an enemy runway at night while avoiding spotlights, and the next has you outnumbered and flying dangerously low through a mountain range. It's a lot more varied than the campaign, showing off more locations, more aircraft, and lots more enemy types. Running into a couple of bogeys is also quite a thrill. The AI in the game is aggressive, but it's still fair, and they will stick to you like glue if you let them get on your tail. But I did think my AI gunner partner could have used a bit of target practice. I was constantly switching over to do his job for him, which would have been fine if he knew how to fly a plane, but no. He was happy to sit at the controls and watch us plunge into the ocean. When you combine these scenarios with the almost infinite possibilities in the mission editor, you can see the developers have included plenty of options for you to make your own fun if you tinker around with them long enough. There's plenty of aircraft to play around with as well, and while it might be a smaller percentage than, say, car enthusiasts, if you consider yourself an expert on anything with wings, this is essentially your version of Forza. There's about 100 aircraft to unlock, and they can all be examined and customized in the hangar. Want to send a message straight to the enemy, or just missing that special someone back home? Why not slap on a fancy decal or two? Another one down there. Delightful. When it comes to actually getting your bucket of bolts off the ground and into the air, Birds of Steel has an interesting number of options to accommodate for your skill level. These are summed up in 3 choices: simplified, realistic, and simulator. The first setting is where you're going to have the most fun with the game. Simplified allows you to thrash the plane about without too much concern for losing control. Enemies take less damage, and there's more HUD information like a leading aim reticule during the dogfights. You'll breeze through the campaign in this setting, but you'll also gain less XP, which you're going to need later on to unlock more aircraft. Realistic turns on some of the harsher physics in the game, and you'll have to watch how sharply you turn, or you'll send yourself into an exhilarating but downright dangerous spin. Then there's the simulation mode, which takes away all of your assists, and just makes it a challenge to stay in the air, let alone avoid enemy fire. It's harsh, but both of these tougher difficulties offer more than just increased XP. I don't know if it was just because these planes would have been really hard to fly back in the day, but I never felt satisfied finishing a game on simple, and I'd usually jump straight back in the cockpit and try a tougher difficulty just to do the mission justice. Plus, there's a great sense of accomplishment when you bring your plane in for that perfect landing on simulation. Just gonna put the nose down here and... Another mission oh Being a console exclusive, the game's been built around the limitations of a controller, but the default controls are a bit derpy. The right stick controls your throttle and everything else is on the left. Luckily, you can remap all the buttons and sticks to your own liking, and you'll quickly fall into a really comfortable flying groove. Once you're up and about in the air, the scenery can also be a bit of a mixed bag. The majority of the missions over the water look great, especially at dusk, but I thought some of the ground units were a bit flat and lifeless. That was until they started firing at me. I don't know if the exploding flak was actually doing any damage, but it was that exciting I just turned my plane around and fly back through it. Woohoo! Watch out! Each of the aircraft also has a fully detailed cockpit view to choose from, but some of the older aircraft, especially the biplanes, are almost impossible to see out of. So I just stuck to the behind view for the majority of the game, which I usually never do in a flight simulator. This looks particularly awesome when you lock onto an enemy, loop after him before blasting it out of the sky. And this is where my main love affair with the game lies, in the dogfighting. I think there's just too many games these days with automatic settings and modern weaponry that do all the work for you. So it's really refreshing to play a good old-fashioned game where you have to switch to your guns and go after your targets manually. This carries over to the multiplayer too. Matches can be set up in a similar fashion to the scenarios, with AI bots filling in any empty slots just to make sure the skies are always full of chaos. I also didn't mind a couple of the objective-based games that I initially thought wouldn't work in a flight combat game. Like any good sim, Birds of Steel is packed full of detail, but it still manages to maintain that arcade action-y feel when it comes to the actual flying. You can tell the developers have made a real effort to squeeze in as much content as possible, particularly for the old World War II fighter pilot enthusiast out there. This, however, is also my main concern, as anyone who's not really invested in this genre of game might not have the legs to slug it through some of the duller, longer missions at the beginning, and therefore won't unlock the really cool aircraft and some of the more exciting missions later on, which is a shame because there are some really fantastic moments in this game. Still, having those varied difficulties makes this a game that's accessible to almost anyone who wants to try flying some of aviation's greatest machines, so I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. All right, to the skies.
Thanks, Goose. Badge, I have a pretty shaky history with flight sims. You know, the first game I ever played was on our first ever family computer, which ran entirely on DOS, and it was called Skyrunner. And this was my first experience of piloting an aircraft in a game. Basically, the aim was to, you know, fly this plane and shoot trees out of your path. And even then, I remember being pretty rubbish at it. So, for my triumphant and awkward return to the skies, I thought I'd try earning my wings on something a little bit more easygoing and free in case it all ended up being a wasted disaster I didn't want to blow my money on. Our gratis pick for this week is Microsoft Flight, which you can find on PC. Prepare for non-stop action.
Well, contrary to Birds of Steel, it's clear that Microsoft Flight is on a bit of a budget, and it's missing some polish here and there.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a game for hardcore flight sim enthusiasts, but for beginners that are looking to learn the basics of flying with something that's a little bit more accessible, I think it's not a bad place to start.
And also, unlike Birds of Steel, the voiceover here is pretty unpleasant to the ears. She's just a bit chatty, a bit chatty McGee, right in your ear from the moment you start the engine.
Okay, there are 3 keys to landing an airplane. Speed, speed, and you guessed it, speed. My instructor always told me, you've got to slow down to go down.
She'll set you up for your first takeoff, show you how to gain speed and altitude with a combination of aerodynamics and throttle.
And how to ace your first landing.
We're getting a little...
Wait a second.
I thought the ambulance was a nice touch.
You know, I found that woman really irritating at first as well, but she actually did a pretty good job of telling me what I was doing wrong as I was doing it, not just after it happened, so I did have some time to try and adjust.
We're a little high. Reduce the throttle.
True to real-life flying, landing is the trickiest part. And getting the right combination of speed and angle of approach isn't easy, but it's really satisfying when you master it.
Hey, nice landing.
She'll even help you out in earlier missions if you forget something important.
Throttle down to about 45% for our approach. Okay, I'll lower the landing gear.
I liked how she talks about things like how the different planes handled and how some are more prone to bouncing when you land. In the free version of the game, you have 2 different planes to cruise around on the big island of Hawaii. The Stearman for something a little old school, and the Icon, which is more futuristic.
Additional planes can be purchased with Microsoft points, as well as extra islands that you have to pay for with the Hawaiian Adventure Pack, which is to be expected, but there's enough free content here to get you started. Your instructor will run you through all the important checklists and cockpit controls, but there's also a really handy user interface to refer to as well that shows you all your speed, wind bearing, throttle, all of that kind of stuff. So it's not like one of those more hardcore sims where you have to just simply refer to your, actual altimeter on the plane's dash.
But like any sim, you can just take your plane and fly around to get a feel for the aircraft, enjoying your aeronautical skills from various different camera views.
There's definitely more game elements to Microsoft Flight than your average sim. There's achievements to unlock a career mode and points for aerobatic tricks, and I think this all adds to the appeal beyond simply simulating flight. And to be honest, if you really wanted the real deal experience, I think you'd probably opt for something a little bit more technical than this.
There's also a multiplayer mode where you can zip about the island of Hawaii with a friend. Here I come, here I come, here I come, here I come! Hex, I expected us to have some pretty spectacular crashes there, but it was actually very hard to line our planes up.
I know, I spent half my time just kind of flying around trying to find you without stalling my plane, and I think I'm just too crap at flying to actually fly in a straight line to actually hit you. Overall, I think the game looked pretty good for a flight sim, but I really do mean for a flight sim. While the planes are nicely polished with some great detail, close inspection of any of the scenery reveals everything that's pixelated, tiled, and two-dimensional, and there's really no sense of the world being populated at all.
I feel like this game should have come free with a copy of Windows 95.
It's something wonderfully awkward about it, isn't there? That's what I love about it, though.
I know sim games aren't meant to, they're not about the graphics, but I still think that it needed to look a bit better than this.
Well, I think for a free game, it's going to have its limitations. But then again, they're obviously trying to make some money back with those paid add-ons, which aren't cheap, mind you.
Yeah, I did get bored flying around in just my one little island in the free version, and I know you can buy other sets, but I also think that flight sim games especially should be more than just a few islands. You should be able to explore the world, and you can't do that here. I haven't been to Hawaii, but these islands didn't really feel like Hawaii to me.
Yeah, I think having a flight game that's based a little bit more around mission objectives, though, makes up for that a little bit. And if you're new to the world of flight sims, then this could be a great place for you to start, and at no cost to you.
One more. Let's see if you can get around this.
Good game.
Hex, there are a few games that I've gone into with expectations as low as Kinect Star Wars, but can those expectations be low enough?
Something dark I see in these Padawans' future.
If there's one thing we gamers have always wanted to do, it's to hold an actual lightsaber in our hands and feel the Force within us. A Kinect Star Wars game makes perfect sense. I mean, what better way to feel the power of the Force than to actually wield it with your hands?
Yeah, and this is the biggest Kinect game that we've played, and with a universe like Star Wars, there's plenty to see and plenty to do. The game is broken up into a selection of bulky minigames, but first let's start with the campaign. After a quick tutorial, you're introduced to a Yoda impersonator. Or maybe it's Yoda's cousin. I don't know who he is, but this ain't Yoda.
Welcome, Padawans. Brought here in a dark time, you are. Time of trials, yes. Time of danger? Great hope in you, we have. Rest now. Tomorrow, your lessons begin.
Yes, and Samuel L. Jedi is a shadow of his former self too. In fact, all of the characters in this game are pretty poor imitations.
Council thanks you. We know you understand the importance of this undertaking.
You just really have to let go of any attachment you have to the films or the Star Wars canon as you play this, or you'll just be disappointed.
Yeah, and this is very much an episode 1 to 3 vibe too, which is also disappointing. That means you're going to be fighting a lot of the robots from the bad Star Wars. But it's not all bad. You'll be infiltrating bases, riding speeder bikes, having serious duels, and some space battles too. Using a lightsaber for the most part feels quite responsive, and I was quite surprised, Hex. I thought it would be much more random. Deflecting laser fire feels natural, and I especially liked how it mimics your arms, even if you're holding the lightsaber with 2 hands. It's especially hilarious when you just go nuts though and derp out the models.
When you run into tougher enemies though, you'll hit some problems because the tutorial doesn't really do a good job of teaching you how to fight them. The trick is to sidestep or jump over the enemy and slash them from behind. The game uses color coding to telegraph when something is coming towards you or needs to be dodged. But with the exception of those speeder bike sections, I found the telegraphing wasn't really good enough for you to counter in time, especially because the Kinect has that slight timed response lag.
Yeah, and you really notice that when objects are being thrown at you and you need to force them out of the way, or if you need to jump or do a dodge, and so I found those sections really made it more about trial and error than skill or reaction time. This is especially noticeable in the duels, which are randomly thrown at you in the campaign. You need to raise your arm to block incoming attacks, and then after a few successful blocks, you can start wailing on your enemy.
Sit, deflect his attacks, and look for an opening.
In theory, this sounds really awesome, but in practice, I found it pretty broken.
Yeah, I mean, for a start, when you get to attack in a duel, it just doesn't really feel like it's responding to you correctly. The time frame is so short that you don't really feel like you have a chance to, get a good, decent attack in before going back to blocking. And secondly, you just don't feel like an awesome Jedi doing this.
Yeah, it's like when they attack, you need it to be that slow, but it doesn't feel like it's in slow motion. They just seem like a really crap enemy.
You're both just really derpy and slow.
Excellent.
When it throws you into that cross-saber moment, there's this pulsating light on your saber, and you kind of have to match your push forward, I think, with that, but it doesn't explain it properly, and eventually you just get it by accident.
But I thought the slice and dice sections where you carve your way through goons is really where this game is at its best.
Yeah.
The camera will automatically swing to the next enemy, dashing towards them works well, and even though throwing your hand around to use the force is a bit off at times, it's still pretty fun.
I didn't really enjoy the force stuff, and I should have. It's a perfect game for it, but I found it just wasn't responsive or intuitive enough. I think the biggest challenge in this game is just moving that character around, though. Like you said, the dash forward works fine, but everything else I felt just stilted the action. All the dodging and ducking and jumping, sometimes it didn't recognize me, especially that sidestep. There's not a heap of platforming here, but you can definitely tell they struggled with that. It's just a shame we can't have virtual reality treadmills that would solve all the problems.
I think they did a little bit better than, say, the likes of Rise of Nightmares. Remember how you had to, like, twist your body to turn left and right? I mean, that was just so frustrating. I much prefer how games like Kinect Rush do it, where you can just move your arms.
Yeah, I like that. The best part of this campaign was definitely the speeder bike sections. Racing through the jungle and braking to take out enemies and boosting forwards. It just felt like out of the films. There's also a selection of pod races you can do in a separate mini-game, and I even enjoyed these, and they've got a few extra tactics, such as, braking for the racing line. There's also shields, and you can ram enemies.
I also quite like those Rancor sections. They were pretty cool.
I could do that all day. Oh, you can eat them. So we were having an okay time with the campaign and some of the mini-games. Some parts were better than others. There was a bit of frustration, and then we discovered this.
Look sharp, my friend. You've got some real competition now.
What the f? What's that doing in my Star Wars? What is it?
I don't hate dancing games, I'll put that out there, but there's a time and a place, and this just isn't it.
This time, baby, I'll be
Aside from the fact that it shouldn't be there at all, as a dance minigame, it's not that great. I mean, the song selection isn't good, the moves are quite often repeated, and they've replaced all the lyrics with these tacky Star Wars lines that,
It's not quite the childhood dream.
What's this?
This is a bit 60s. This is a bit Austin Powers.
I think this game feels really rushed to me. Some parts of it work quite well, but it's all overshadowed by clunks. So you'll be having an okay time, and then suddenly something will happen that just doesn't work or doesn't feel right, and that frustrates you, such as the space battles. I should have loved those space battles, but then when it got to throwing the mines, it wouldn't recognize me, and that hologram just sat there taunting me. It kind of ruins it. And I think the devs know that parts of it don't work too well, because some parts, even if you fail, it just moves on. Even in the tutorial, I didn't get one of them, and it goes, oh well, good luck, it just moves on.
Yeah.
Teach me.
I think overall it was just a little bit too ambitious. I mean, maybe if they sort of trimmed it down and refined the content, it could be a better game. But in general, I think it is just pitched really young. We're all waiting for big, hardcore games to come to the Kinect, but I don't think it's ever really gonna happen. I mean, this is still just aimed at kids with all the Rancor stomping and the dancing games, and it's just not what we wanted out of a Star Wars game.
Maybe it's time for a Kinect 2.0 or just better software, because if this is the best the Kinect can do with something like Star Wars, I find that a bit depressing. I'm giving this 5.5 out of 10 rubber chickens.
I think younger kids will still really enjoy it. I'm giving it 6.
You are now mine.
So did you guess the game for this week? It was Star Wars Rebel Assault for the PC, one of the first CD-ROM computer games from 1993.
Such impressive visuals for the time.
Yeah, they were. Next week on the show, we review a game that's causing a little bit of a buzz, Fez.
Thanks to everyone who tweeted along tonight with the hashtag GGTV, and don't forget, over on Spawn Point this weekend on ABC3 is the show for gamers of all ages.
And make sure to download our Good Game app where you can submit your viewer reviews. Till next time, may all your games be good ones. Hex out.
Barjo out.
Oh, I did that thing that you do.
What?
That thing, that weird salute. I never do that.
You never do
Why
the
would I
salute?
do that? No,
Mine's more of a curvature.
you ever watch Red Dwarf?